Have you failed at anything in your life? Great, then this podcast is for you. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for joining me on this episode. In this episode, we'll talk about why it's important to actually listen to your imposter syndrome and when you can lean into it. And Lauren, you are a counselor. You're a specialist with trauma. So if you would like to go over what you provide with parts therapy and how that kind of relates to imposter syndrome and when we can actually listen to it instead of just quickly saying, I feel like an imposter, so I should change immediately.
So I'm trained in a modality called internal family systems, which is parts work. And that's my main modality, among other things that I do. And most of us use parts language without being aware of it. We'll say, a part of me wants to do this, but a part of me wants to do that. If we think of neural networks in our brain, as far as like memories or concepts or whatever, individual neural networks, which is what all our brains are consisting of, parts work is pretty much that. Right. And so you could think of each of the parts in ourself as separate individual personalities or even people.
Mhm.
And which is how we end up with this duality of like, well, a part of me wants to do this and a part of me wants to do that, or a part of me doesn't want to. So kind of leaping from that, one of the things that I work with a lot with my clients is imposter syndrome. And I myself suffer from imposter syndrome every single day that I go to work. The first thing we kind of want to think about is that every part of our psyche that organizes around our experiences is trying to be helpful. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people because some parts can be very devastating. Parts that use drugs, parts that cut, parts that are suicidal. But every part is ultimately trying to stabilize our system to some degree. Imposter syndrome parts are doing the same thing. Sometimes imposter syndrome parts come from messages that we received growing up from peers or our parents that we're not good enough. And sometimes they're just internal when we're very ambitious or we are very overachieving. Oftentimes, overachieving parts also come from experiences we've had when we were young. And once a part is created, much like most neural networks, like 2 + 2 is 4, it's kind of there for life. We can learn to repurpose parts or teach them new skills, and that's the whole goal of imposter syndrome. If we try to look at it from a perspective of each of us has experiences from a caregiver who is trying to help us excel. Sometimes as caregivers, we get frustrated and we're not very kind about how we try to motivate our those in our care to achieve or excel or do better. And usually when we get loud or frustrated, like the example I use is my daughter, my youngest daughter, Erin, who's going to love hearing this example spread all over the place. But Erin went through a phase where we were arguing about her penciling in her eyebrows. And this is the example I give all my clients. And this was a huge thing, like what, 8 years ago, right? Kids were all penciling. And I come from the 80s. We had thin, plucked eyebrows. So one morning she comes out in the kitchen and her eyebrows look a little heavy to me. And we had already had this go around a few times. And I said, Erin, your eyebrows. And she's like, I don't care. They're fine. And I'm like, you might want to look in the mirror again. So this kind of went back and forth for a few minutes. And it's like 5:30 in the morning. And my goal as her caregiver is to make sure that she's happy, healthy, loved, gets along with her peers, isn't made fun of. I'm looking out for her best interest. And as she's arguing with me in the kitchen, I'm escalating out of desperation to protect her from her own decision, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get mean and I get loud and I pull up a photo of Groucho Marx, which she had never heard of. And this is how we argue in our own minds with our parts. And that's why I use this example. I'm coming from a place of love and good. I want to protect her, but I'm not behaving in a loving and good way. I'm actually berating and probably being really mean about it. And Erin ended up in tears and we didn't have a good morning. And she didn't end up listening to what I was trying to tell her anyway. She just stormed off and went to school in a really, really bad headspace. We take that and we apply that to the imposter syndrome. Okay. I am the imposter syndrome part going, this isn't good enough. And I'm not doing it in a kind and loving and helpful way. I am being berating and loud because I'm trying to motivate. And what we all tend to do is what Erin did. instantly get defensive and argue. Shut up, go away. I don't need you. I know what I'm doing. The more we do that, the louder the part gets.
Mhm.
And this is how we end up either traits of narcissism, where we completely ignore any parts of us that are trying to improve us, um, or just really, really low self-esteem. So if we take it back to the kitchen example, and this is why I use it, if Aaron had said to me, okay, I'll go look, I'm listening. I'm going to go see if I can improve what's happening with my eyebrows. Our conversation would have been over and I wouldn't have escalated. We can do the same thing with parts of ourselves. So it starts with just identifying that this part, even though it doesn't feel like it, is trying to be helpful. And then asking, what is it you need me to know? Like, how are you trying to be helpful? So how I use imposter syndrome parts, I work with first responders, and that's my entire clientele is almost 100% consisting of police officers. I have extensive training in working with this population and years of experience, but I don't feel good enough. So every morning when I wake up, every morning and get ready for work, this imposter syndrome part is going, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you working with these people? You got no business working with this population. No business. You shouldn't be working with people. Are you
Oh,
nuts, right? You didn't get a good night's sleep. If they knew what a mess it was in your head. And I have two choices of how I can deal with the imposter syndrome part that's going, you just shouldn't even be a counselor, right? You're just there's this meme I sent to my friends the other day. It's a shopping cart on fire. And underneath it says me going to work with my mental health issues. I'm kind of like, yeah, that's kind of all of
those are
us,
the
right?
contents in the shopping cart.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like that every morning when I haven't had a good night's sleep and I'm not feeling totally confident. So I can take it one of two directions or three directions, really. I can ignore this part completely, and it's going to be in the back of my head constantly, and it's
Not gonna
going
go
to start
away.
affecting, yeah, how I feel about my work. I can argue with it. Look at all the trainings I've had. I'm perfect for this, and that's narcissism, right? I don't need to learn anything else. I don't need any more help. I don't need consultation. I'm really good at what I do. Really good at what I do. And I have met those counselors. I'm really good at what I do. I don't need more training. I already know what I'm doing. Right?
Narcissistic counselors.
Narcissistic
Oh
counselors,
no.
and they're everywhere.
Oh gosh.
If you are tuning into this podcast episode, chances are you are a busy person. If you are tired of the same old dinners, then try making Spanish tapas the authentic way with Chef Delgado's masterclass. The link in the description box below will give you lifetime access to a step-by-step course with 9 video classes. I've taken this course myself and I've wowed friends and family with delicious shareable tapas. Thank you, Chef Delgado, for sponsoring this podcast, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
My third choice is to work with this part the way I would want my daughter to work with me in the kitchen, right? And that's the way I choose to work with it. So when I do wake up with all of this self-doubt, the only thing I can do is listen to it and say, okay, let me share what I have learned with you, my training and all of the stuff that I try to do to be competent, and make a commitment that I will keep learning.
Mhm.
Right. And that's really what drives me to continue to do trainings, to continue to read books, to continue to learn from my clients. I have spent over probably $100,000 in training since graduate school out of pocket, easily, probably more.
Oh,
But
goodness.
imposter syndrome part, while that might seem extreme, is what kind of drives me to do that, to continue to excel as best I can, and to never take an attitude of I already know everything, right? I am very good at what I do and I don't need to learn anything new. And it gives me an kind of an attitude of humility, I think, I hope, with my clients and in my approach with training and learning, so that I'm constantly striving to do better. Those of us who listen to and work with our imposter syndrome parts are usually oftentimes overachievers because we keep trying and pushing and learning
Like
and wanting to,
overcompensating.
sometimes overcompensating. And when I look back at what I've spent on training, I think there has been an element of that. I've done trainings I don't use. I've done trainings I'm like, I don't know why the hell I did that. I started to apply for a PhD program. Talk about overcompensating. I don't need a PhD, but I thought, okay, those letters are going to make me feel like I finally know what I'm doing. Right. And so those are
Yeah.
the two, yeah, the two branches, overcompensating or narcissism. I'm already perfect, or like I need more letters behind my name.
I mean, because I think most of us have imposter syndrome. But to hear that even a successful counselor who has helped probably so many people in the first responder field, like a field that's so important for society, like to hear that you have had imposter syndrome does help that, we're not in this alone. But
I
yeah,
love that you said that. Yeah. Everybody has imposter syndrome parts.
part of what I do is food blogging. I'll put
Yeah.
my Instagram here. But yeah, I enjoy it. I enjoy highlighting small businesses wherever I go on my travels and cafes, restaurants, obviously. But then there is that imposter syndrome part that I'm not a chef. I'm not, Anthony Bourdain's child or something like that. So that constantly goes. And then when I moved to Scotland, where I am now, even though this is the UK flag, um, I thought, well, the next step will be to become a chef, to go to culinary school, so that I will feel adequate enough. I will feel enough
Oh,
to
yeah.
deserve the life that I want. But it's like, but then once I spent more time here and like I can achieve the life I want, even without being a chef, even without this title or this whatever. So
And that's a great example, Jan, because even if you went to culinary school, depending on how you encounter and work with your imposter syndrome part, it wouldn't be enough.
yeah,
And the things you were saying earlier that made me smile, this is what your imposter syndrome is telling you. Who do you think you are? You're not the child of this amazing chef.
yeah,
You're not someone who has any business
Anthony
talking.
Bourdain.
Yeah, yeah. You got no business talking about food. Everybody has a palate. Of course, you have business talking about food. But that's how our imposter syndrome parts work. They give us these messages, this self-doubt constantly. Um, and like I said, even if you did go to college, let's say you became a top chef, you would still have that part because we all have that part going, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah,
you're still,
like the
this is the,
goalpost is always moved type of
it
thing.
can be, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we reframe it so that we look at the goalpost moving as a good thing, I
Mhm.
will never achieve, hopefully, a status of I'm there. I don't need to learn anything else. And if I look at that in a negative light, it's going to eat me up, right? I can never be good enough. But if I look at it as a motivating factor, this part of me wants me to keep trying and growing and learning, then it isn't a negative thing. It's really just more of a motivating part.
When we, I guess, realize that it is imposter syndrome, when we're like, when we catch those thoughts of, oh, I will never achieve this or who am I type of thing. Should we, like, what should be the next step to greet it with like compassion that like I don't need to immediately knock
Yeah.
this down or something?
The first step, and it's funny that you use the word compassion. In IFS, we talk about the eight C's, and depending on who you train with, it's gimmicky, but it's really kind of accurate. We start with like curiosity. What is this part trying to tell me? We do want to get to a place of compassion ultimately with the part. We want to get to a place of appreciation. So, which is hard to do, right? I cannot imagine my daughter trying to appreciate me ragging on her eyebrows at 5:30 in the morning. But she could have said, "Oh my God, thank you for looking out for me. You love me so much. You don't want me to face any kind of scrutiny from the world." And that would have shifted my approach to her. So there are, when your imposter syndrome parts start getting really kind of berating, right? There's different ways that they approach you. It could start with, who do you think you are? You're not Anthony Bourdain's daughter. But they can go to the extreme of you will never be good enough. You will never achieve that thing. And when we get to that place, what feels like a polarization is what we call it. Like a part of you is saying that's just never going to happen, and now you're opposed with it. It can oftentimes be a function of how we have encountered and worked with that part. So if we can back ourselves down from whatever we're feeling negatively towards this part, and start with curiosity and, like you said, a little bit of compassion and maybe some gratitude. Okay, I'm listening. I hear that you're actually trying to better me. That your goal isn't really to make me feel like crap about myself, it's to actually help. Thank you. I mean, I don't love being berated, but thank you. What we will often notice is the parts will soften tremendously. And then it changes how we interact with that part. So taking it back to the example in the kitchen, which is why I use it, our interactions are determined by how the two of us respond to each other. I could have used better skills. I could have softened, but I was so desperate to try to protect her from herself. She could have used better skills and said, okay, I'm listening. Thanks. I'll go look. And our entire interaction would have been different. Yeah, the first step is coming at it with a little bit of curiosity, some compassion, some gratitude, sitting with the part. There are lots of other steps if this part comes from a place of trauma for healing it and transforming it into a mentor instead of a tormentor.